Today is February 1st, so you know what time it is. It is time for another monthly reading wrap up. So in January, I went through a little bit of a book slump. So by the time I got to the end of like week 2 of January, I'd only read like 2 books. But then I also did a 24-hour readathon in which I read 4 books. I ended up finishing the month having read 9 books. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Hi, hello, how are you? How has your week been? Let us go over all of the books that I read in January. The first book that I finished this month was Absolutely Not in Love by Jenny Proctor. This is a clean hockey romance. It's part of the Appies series, which is described as a closed door hockey romance series, but when I read these books, I generally find that they are more clean than they are closed door. But this book was so cute. It follows Gracie and Felix, and they are neighbors. Felix has, seen Gracie around as she's like coming in and out of her apartment, and he, low-key, is so down bad for her the whole time and actively works to set up situations where they have to interact. However, Gracie grew up around hockey. Her brother played hockey, and so she has had a lot of bad experiences with hockey players and has vowed that she will never date another hockey player ever again. And so Felix has to get a little creative with how he's going to convince her that they should date. This book was so cute. Felix was quite literally so down bad for Gracie the entire time. And this book kind of really opened my eyes and made me realize that I really adore when in romance books the characters' love for each other is shown through acts of service. Because those types of things really show that they listen to each other and they remember the small little details about each other and really care to put in the effort to create something, to give a gift, to do something that the other person would really care about that maybe not everybody else would care about. And in this book, the third act conflict was not heinous. I really despise when in romance books like one of the characters does something absolutely outrageous to the other character, and then like at the end of the book you're just like, oh, happy, like whatever, and I'm like, wait a minute, what about that thing that you just did like 5 pages ago? Like, that's like not okay. We can't just like brush that under the rug. So I gave that a 4.25 stars. Then I read The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley, which was a sci-fi book that had an open door romance in it. In this book, we follow an unnamed female main character who works for a branch of the British government. They have discovered time travel. I'm not really sure why, but they decided that in their time travel experiments, they were going to go back in time and take people who were already going to die in their time and bring them to current day to see how they adapted to current day society. And the female main character, her job is to help the out of time person adapt to current day society. I'm not going to lie, I had heard that this author used a lot of big vocabulary, had a very distinct way of writing this book. Overall, when I read this book, it kind of smacked me in the face and called me dumb. There were so many words in this book that I just did not understand, that I did not previously know the definition for, which then left me so confused because there would be pages where entire paragraphs I simply just did not understand. And so I think that dampened my enjoyment of the book. I think Kellyanne Bradley she wore out her thesaurus when writing this book. One thing I did find interesting in the book was seeing Kellyanne Bradley's perspective on how people out of their time would react to new technologies. Understanding that when people are put in a situation so different from what they're used to, it's not always the big obvious things that they get hung up on. Like this character, it wasn't the television, it wasn't the phone, it wasn't air conditioning, it was the toilet. He really was just absolutely fascinated by. And I thought that was so interesting to point out and understand that each person was going to react differently to this situation. And so all of the people who were taken out of their time had different things that they really gravitated towards, the things that they really didn't understand and got really hung up on. And I just thought that that was so interesting. And if anybody watching this has read this book, could you please explain why we never learned the name of our female main character. I didn't catch that reasoning. I rated that a 3 stars. Then I read Just Last Night by Mahari McFarlane, which is literary fiction with an open door romance. This book follows Evie in the aftermath of losing someone very close to her. Throughout the book, you're really just following her experience with her grief and how she is working to heal from that loss. This book is very heavy. You definitely should check trigger warnings if you are interested in reading this book. But it was a beautiful story about grief and how it doesn't always hit you when you're expecting it to. Grief is one of those feelings that is really hard to understand unless you have gone through it yourself. Understanding that it's not always the most obvious things that make you really miss that person. And I feel like Mahari McFarlane really captures the idiosyncrasies of that experience within this book. And you really just feel for the main character and the hurt that she's experiencing. And like on another note, the romance in this book was really cute and really just like impactful. So I gave this book a 4 stars. Then I read A Groom of One's Own by Emma St. Clair. This is another book in that Appy's hockey romance series. This book was clean for the most part, but then there was one kind of closed door scene right at the end in the last probably like 20% of the book, but it was very tame compared to other closed door romance books. This book follows Eli. He is a Canadian immigrant and he gets some things messed up in his timeline, in his paperwork. He is on the verge of being deported back to Canada. If that were to happen, he would lose his job because they would not be able to hold his space on the hockey team for him. And he lives with his mom, who has a lot of chronic illnesses, health issues, and being in Harvest Hollow is really the best place for her. And so he does not want to get deported back to Canada because he would lose his job and would really disrupt his mom's life. Unintentionally, he gets this girl to marry him so that he can stay in the US. I had never read a Marriage of Convenience book before, so I really didn't know what I was getting into. But oh my gosh, Eli, like, you know, it is a marriage of convenience. So the relationship is not built on feelings that the characters have for each other, but despite that, immediately he gets so protective over this girl, and he just wants to take care of her, and he's like, you're gonna be my wife, like I'm gonna take care of you regardless of like whether or not we are like in love, like I'm gonna take care of you. And it was just so adorable. I loved him. And the female main character, I'm not gonna say her name because she's not named in like the blurb of this book on Goodreads, but I loved her. She was so sweet and I just wanted to rub her up in bubble wrap the whole time. I just loved her. So I rated that one a 4 stars. Then I read Archer's Voice, which is a open door contemporary romance. This is what I get for going into books completely blind, because somehow I was under the impression that this was a YA romance. It wasn't. Like I said, it was open door. It was very open door. But that is what I get for going into books completely blind. So Bree has been through a lot in her life, and she just can't really handle being back home anymore. So she kind of drives until she runs out of road and ends up in this little small town in Maine. And there she meets Archer, who is like the town recluse. He doesn't talk to anybody, and he is an outcast in the town, despite the fact that he is related to the people who like own the whole town. And immediately Bree decides that she's gonna befriend him. I really enjoyed the dynamic of Archer and Bree. Bree heard a lot about Archer from what the people in town were saying about him, and she really like made an active effort to kind of ignore everything they said and form her own opinion of Archer, which I really liked. Seeing how they both helped each other on their own healing journeys was really sweet. But like my heart just hurt for Archer the whole time. I rated this book a 3 stars. Then I read A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. This book is a closed-door romance, which don't even get me started on because this is a YA romance. And if you've seen any of my videos, then you know that I have a very strong belief that if a book is marketed as YA, then it needs to be clean. And this book was not. So that really annoyed me. It was also really jarring to figure that out while listening to the audiobook. So this book follows Poppy and Rune. They are childhood best friends, and when they are 15, Rune unfortunately has to move back to Norway, which is where he's from. And soon after he moves back, Poppy stops talking to him. Well, now it's 2 years later and Rune has moved back to the US into the house that he lived in before, which is right next door to Poppy's. And so you're kind of going along figuring out why they stopped talking and how they are now going to move forward with their lives. While I was listening to this book, I was on the phone with my friends and I told them that like sometimes it kind of weirds me out when you are reading a book about and the characters are very young and everything for them is just so intense. You know, because like for a majority of this book, the characters are 17. The whole time in this book, everything was just all or nothing with them. And everything was so intense and the worst thing that could ever happen. And while bad things did really happen in this book, a lot of the times I felt like they were overreacting to some of the things that were happening. And I just sometimes have a hard time taking things seriously when characters react so intensely to every tiny little thing that happens. And I'm not gonna lie, by the time I got to the end of this book, the word kisses made me want to hurl. And don't even get me started on the ending of that book, okay? That was a joke. It was a joke. I rated that a 2.75 stars. Then I read The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, which is a mystery thriller, but it does have open door romance moments in it. So Theo is he's a criminal psychotherapist who has had a fascination with the case of Alicia Berenson, who brutally murdered her husband and then refused to say another word after that. So he decides that he is going to get a job at the mental institution where Alicia has lived since she murdered her husband, and he is going to figure out why she killed him and get her to talk again. So I knew that this book was super hyped going into it. A lot of people would consider this to be one of the best mystery thrillers that they've ever read. I'm gonna be honest, I personally didn't think it was worth the hype that everyone gives it. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I know that's gonna ruffle people's feathers and hurt people's feelings. That is just my personal opinion. If you feel otherwise, that's totally fine. I'm not gonna judge you for that, so don't judge me for my opinion. All right. I was like a little disappointed in reading this book, you know, because I knew it was so hyped and so many people love this book. And then I just thought it was kind of like, okay, you know, like so many people rate this book 5 stars. And then like, I want to rate this a 3.5 stars and I don't really feel bad about it. I just expected a lot more from this book. And like, yes, the plot twist was twisty, but I wouldn't say that this is the best thriller that I've ever read. It just wasn't earth-shattering like I expected it to be. And so I think that led to me not enjoying it as much as I could have if I maybe had read it without knowing anything about what other people think about it. So I gave that a 3.5 stars. Then I read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Now this book follows Lucy and Josh, who are the assistants of co-CEOs of this publishing house. And they do not like each other at all. Through circumstances, they are now spending a little bit more time with each other and getting to know each other more than just glaring at each other from their desks across the room. Now, let me ask you this question. Who was playing the hating game? Lucy and Josh? Or me and this book? Both, I think. Lucy, the female main character in this book, had 2 personality traits. One was that she was short. That literally defined her entire personality, and she made sure to remind everyone of that on every other page. And number 2 was that telling Josh that she only wanted him for his body, despite the fact that he always had a visceral reaction when she said that, clearly showing that it bothers him, yet she would continue to say it, which if you continue to say something after they have shared that that is an insecurity for them, you're like kind of one of the worst kind of people. And then we spent the whole book building up on this one plot point, and then Sally Thorne just kind of ripped it apart in the last like 2 pages and it became irrelevant. And I'm like, really? I really hate it when authors do that, because then I'm like, you just wasted my time. I read all 360 pages of this book and the whole big plot point now doesn't even matter? Like, then why did you even include it if it doesn't matter anymore? My review on Goodreads of this book is just that Grinch quote: hate, 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 double hate, loathe entirely. Because I rated this a 1 star and I don't feel bad about it at all. And then the final book that I read this month was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is a very intense sci-fi novel. This book takes place several hundred years into the future, where a new caste system has been put in place, where the red people are the lowest of the lows and the gold rule everything. So in their society, the reds are grinding out work. They live to work to get Mars to be a place where the rest of humanity can eventually come and live. Well, Darrow finds out that the rest of the humans have actually been living on Mars for hundreds of years, and he and his people have been lied to keep them oppressed and working as slaves for the higher up people. And so now Darrow, he's really angry, and so now he wants to work to dismantle this hierarchy in his world. This book, it took me a little bit to get into it because it does have a lot of really intense world building. But Pierce Brown has also created a lot of lingo that's really specific to this world, and the way that he introduces those words to the reader is just through the characters using that lingo. And so, you know, sometimes you get fantasy books where there's a lot of world building, but the author kind of really lays it out plain and simple for you. Whereas in this book, you actually kind of have to pay attention and use context clues to understand how things fit into the world building, which was an interesting thing to read, but I also think it caused me to take a little bit more time to really get into this book, because it took me like a week and a half to 2 weeks to read the first 37% of the book. But then last night I literally binged the whole rest of it. I laid in bed for 5 hours and read the whole rest of the book, because once I got into it, I was really into it. Once we got to like the 40% mark, it was captivating and I was just enraptured with the story. So I'm giving this book a 4.5 stars, but I definitely see the Red Rising saga as having potential to be a 5-star series for me down the line. So I definitely will be continuing the series. It is a YA science fiction, but there are some heavier topics, so you definitely should check trigger warnings if you are wanting to read this book. I think Red Rising is my favorite book that I read in January at a 4.5 stars. So those are all of the 9 books that I read in the month of January. It was an interesting reading month. Had some really great books, had some not so great books. But I'm excited to see, now that I'm out of my book slump, how my reading goes for February. But anyways, that is all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up to let me know that you enjoy this type of content. Comment down below your most favorite book and your least favorite book that you read in January. And subscribe to my channel for more bookish content in the future. I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.